Hi Year 6, welcome back. Chapter 5 today. Chapter 5 is called A Dog's Dinner. Gordon Gould is a liar, Hal thought, as his uncle helped him into the itchy, tartan-lined blazer. I don't have to wear a bow tie, do I? Uncle Nat laughed. If you don't seize the opportunity to wear a bow tie when you're on a royal train, when will you ever wear one? He picked it up. Haven't you ever wondered what it's like to be a prince? Hal frowned at the maroon bow. Propping up his collar, Uncle Nat slung the tie around Hal's neck, creating the bow expertly with nimble fingers. Hal looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. He looked posh. If he wore these clothes to school, he'd be bullied for sure. Think of it as a costume. Pretend you're a spy. Uncle Nat waggled his eyebrows. The name's Beck. Harrison Beck. I am a spy, Hal thought, staring at his reflection, and I'm going to find out who that girl is and why Gordon Gould is lying. He turned to his uncle. You know, you don't need to keep calling me Harrison. You can call me Hal. That's what my friends call me. Thank you, Hal, Uncle Nat beamed. That means a lot. Now, shall we eat? I'm starving. The dining car was bustling. The mouth-watering smell of food coming from the kitchen made Hal's stomach growl. Uncle Nat made a beeline for the table where Isaac, the photographer, was sitting on his own. Sierra and her friend were dining at a table with Stephen and Lydia Pickle. Ernest White was across the aisle on his own, and at the furthest table sat the Baron and his son. As the train swayed, the cutlery and glasses clinked and shuddered, but no one seemed to mind. Why is Sierra Knight on the grand tour? Hal asked, as bowls of steaming soup were placed on the table in front of them. She's a friend of the princess, Isaac replied, picking up his spoon. They worked together several years back. She says she wanted to come because she's researching a role for a new film about a female driver in the Second World War. Shockingly, there weren't any female drivers until the 1980s. Uncle Nat shook his head. Is her friend an actress too? Hal asked. That's not a friend, Uncle Nat replied. That's Lucy Meadows, Sierra Knight's personal assistant. Hal glanced over. Sierra was gazing out of the window. He wondered what she could be staring at, until she pursed her lips and realised it was her own reflection. Oh, Lucy, Sierra grabbed her assistant's arm. Imagine me leaning out of the engine and looking into the camera. She paused, eyes growing wide. There's such a freedom travelling by train, she proclaimed. Then she smiled, pleased with herself. That's a good line, don't you think? Write it down. We'll send it to the screenwriter. Lucy Meadows dutifully took a notebook and pen from her cardigan pocket, while opposite Stephen Pickle slurped his pea soup. I love that brooch, Lydia Pickle huffed. I've never seen a brooch that shape before. A big bow all covered in diamonds. I love bows. The jeweller said it was a one-off. All the girls at the salon love it. It's just so twinkly. She clapped a manicured hand to her forehead. You'll keep a lookout for it, won't you? It cost a mint. Of course, Lucy nodded. We both will. I'm sure it'll turn up. I had it on when we were in the greenhouse, glugging the champers, but then I looked down and it was gone. Lydia stuck out her bottom lip and blinked to show how sad she was. You probably weren't even wearing it, grunted Stephen Pickle. But I was wearing it, Lydia protested. Didn't you see? Hal remembers Lydia's sparkling bow. It had been hard to miss. I hope you put it on the insurance, said Stephen Pickle, tearing a bread roll. Of course I did. Lydia bit her lip and looked away. As the Highland Falcon rattled through Stevenage, the woman who'd been serving drinks in the observation car wheeled in a trolley carrying a side of beef and carving tools. Hal stared at the trolley's white cloth, looking for signs of movement. When she came to serve their table, he stuck out his foot, pushing the cloth in. There was nothing behind it. Hello, he smiled sweetly at the waitress as she served Uncle Nat and Isaac. What's your name? Amy. Do you think I could have an extra Yorkshire pudding, please, Amy? Of course, sir. The smart blazer and bow tie seemed to be working. Amy, can I ask you something? Yes, sir. Have you seen a girl on the train about my age? Amy looked shocked. No, you are the only child passenger. There are no children allowed in the crew carriages. She dropped a second Yorkshire pudding on his plate. and hurriedly pushed the trolley to the next table to serve the Baron and his son. Hal narrowed his eyes. She was lying. No children allowed? There were secrets on this train. He looked down at his Yorkshire puddings. They won't be good as your mum's, Uncle Nat said. No one makes a better pud than Bev. Mum's are the best, Hal agreed. But I'll eat them anyway. I love Yorkshire puddings. He watched Amy serve the Baron, who picked up his napkin, flicked it open, and tucked it into the collar of his shirt. Did you know the Baron owns the most impressive model railway in the whole of Europe? Uncle Nat said. He built most of it himself. Isaac nodded. It is a joy to behold. If you're ever near the castle in Bavaria, you should check it out. He lets the public in at weekends. He's a distant relative of the royal family, Uncle Nat said. I've enjoyed his company a number of times, although I've never met his son before. Across the aisle, Hal saw Ernest White stand up. He had a foam-headed microphone in his hand and was sliding open the top panel of the window. He clamped the microphone to the window frame, foam end poking out, and then plugged it into a small portable recorder, which he tucked between the seat and the carriage wall. What's Mr. White doing? Uncle Nat smiled. He's recording the sound of the steam train travelling at speed. Why? Because it's unique, and for him, it's attached to important memories. The sound of an A4 Pacific under steam is as beautiful to Ernest White as a symphony by Beethoven. Uncle Nat sat back and closed his eyes, listening to the train. Hal tried to do the same, but all he could hear was Lydia Pickle. Last week, I was reading about your break-up with Chad in Hot Stories magazine, Lydia Pickle said to Sierra. And now look at me, having a proper nosh-up with you. She shook her head in disbelief. Is it true you're from Liverpool? You don't even have a Scouse accent. Sierra Knight replied with a tight smile and a tiny nod. Lydia Pickle held up her hands, squeaking in a high voice. Hey, hey, ferry across the Mersey. Stephen Pickle roared with laughter at her terrible impression of a Liverpudlian. Ernest White scowled and shook his head at the noise. No one likes Mr. Pickle, do they? Said Hal. He makes a great deal of money from the railways, but spends very little of it improving them, said Uncle Nat. That upsets people. Who needs trains with seats? Isaac said with a wink. Or air conditioning, or one that runs on time. Why was he invited on this journey then? Well, and Uncle Nat leaned forward, he owns quite a bit of the line we're travelling on. Not to invite him would have been an insult. I think everyone was hoping he wouldn't come. But he wants his pictures in the paper, Isaac said, giving Hal a knowing look. Standing next to royalty. Pudding arrived and Hal wolfed down the sugary pile of eaten mess. Where's Lady Lansbury? He said, looking around. Isn't she having dinner? In the private dining compartment, Uncle Nat replied. She's having a personal ceremony to commemorate the passing of her husband, and I believe... He leaned in and whispered, scattering his ashes into the steam and the smuts. Oh! Hal was startled. She's being served by her gentleman-in-waiting. Is that the man who looks after her dogs? Uncle Nat chuckled. I'll bet when he took the job he didn't realise he'd have to wait on 5 dogs as well as a countess. She must love dogs, Hal said. They're a new addition to the household, Isaac said. She got them after her husband passed away. If Lady Lansbury and her gentleman-in-waiting were here in the dining car, the dogs must be on their own in the compartment. Please may I leave the table? I want to go and unpack my bag. Uncle Nat wiped his mouth with his napkin and nodded. Would you mind if I stayed for an after-dinner coffee? No, Hal got up. I'll be fine. He hurried through the sleeper carriages, listening out for snufflings or woofs. From behind the second-to-last door, number 2, he heard scratching, a high-pitched whine and an excited yap. He looked about and then turned the handle. To his surprise, the door opened. 5 snowy dogs rushed in, and he laughed as they jumped up, pinning him to the door, trying to lick his face. One let out a joyful bark. Shh, Hal whispered, slipping into the compartment and sinking to his knees. You have to be quiet. The dogs clamoured around him. in a huddle, nuzzling their heads against his shoulders. He tried to stroke each of them, but they overwhelmed him, and he found himself lying on the floor, giggling as wet noses poked his ribcage, looking for a pet, and his face got licked. "Stop it," he giggled, trying to sit up. "Sit!" To his surprise, all 5 dogs obediently sat on their haunches and panted at him with shining eyes. Hal reached out. "Let's see." He read the silver tags dangling below their diamond-studded collars. The nearest dog was darker than the rest, with oatmeal fur. "You are Trafalgar, and you're Viking." Viking barked as if to disagree. "You're Shannon," he said to the dog with a flash of silver to her fur. "You're very pretty, aren't you, Fitzroy?" He struggled to grab the tag of the 4th dog, who was trying to dig up the carpet. "And what's your name?" The last was the smallest of all 5. All the others had black or brown eyes, but she looked at him with eyes as blue as the sea. He patted his knees, and she placed her head on his lap. He pulled up her tag. "Bailey." He stroked the top of her head. "Well, it's lovely to meet you all," Viking yipped. Hal pointed at each dog as he repeated their names: Trafalgar, Viking, Shannon, Fitzroy, and Bailey. The 5 Samoyeds smiled at him. Hal grinned back. "I'm Hal." He patted his chest, and Bailey licked his face. "You've made a right mess in here, haven't you?" You can see. The carpet and the seat were covered in dog hairs. The top of the bunk was down and made up as a bed for Lady Lansbury's gentleman-in-waiting. There were 5 water bowls on the floor below the window, and in the sink a bag of dog biscuits sat below the shelf, which had 8 octagonal glass bottles with Gastora written on their labels in swirly writing. Fitzroy padded to the compartment door and scratched at it. "No, Fitzroy, you mustn't do that," Hal scolded. Bailey clambered onto his lap and curled up. "Hello, girl." He stroked her head. She lifted her nose to nuzzle his palm. As he sank his face into her fluffy neck, his heart lurched at the sound of footsteps approaching. Pushing Bailey off, he scrambled to his feet, looking around in a panic. There was nowhere to hide. I wonder who's coming in, and what is he going to do about it? We'll find out in the next chapter, chapter 6, called The Phantom Feast. See you later.